Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, my state of Vermont has been hit very, very hard by Hurricane Irene. Widespread flooding caused a number of deaths, the loss of many homes and businesses, and hundreds of millions, perhaps $1 billion, in damage to property and infrastructure. I have visited many of the most hard-hit towns, and I have been shocked and moved by the extent of the damage that I saw. Irene will go down in history as one of the very worst natural disasters ever to hit the state of Vermont. Let me just share a few facts with you about the extent of the damage. Already, more than 5,200 Vermonters have registered with FEMA. Remember, we're a state of only 630,000 people and approximately 200,000 households, and yet more than 5,200 Vermonters have already registered with FEMA. Mr. President, more than 700 homes were severely damaged or completely destroyed. 700 in a state which has about 200,000 households. Between 1,500 and 2,000 families have been displaced, their housing uncertain as we approach Vermont's brutally cold winter season, and it is beginning to get cold in Vermont. More than 73,000 homes were left without electricity, a third of all of the homes in our state. Tens of thousands of Vermonters lost their phone service, and in some areas, these services still have not been fully restored. Mr. President, more than 2,000 roads were badly damaged. 2,000 roads, including 135 segments of state highways. More than 300 bridges were damaged. Hundreds of roads and bridges remain closed, while many others are only open to emergency vehicles today. Some towns still have limited access because the roads and bridges that link them to the outside world were destroyed. Further, dozens of town libraries, town halls, municipal and volunteer fire departments have been damaged or destroyed. 90 public schools could not open on time. The last one is just now opening for the year. Hundreds of businesses and more than 360 farms with more than 15,000 acres of farmland have been damaged, tearing at the fabric of our rural economy. Our Amtrak and freight services were completely suspended as rail beds literally washed into rivers. One Amtrak line is still down today. The largest state office complex was completely flooded and is closed until further notice. 1,600 state employees cannot go to work in that building. Important files and computer systems have been ruined, disrupting the ability of the state to deliver critical state functions. Mr. President, I know that as in times past, we will pick up the pieces in Vermont and restore our homes and business. And I have to tell you that if there is any silver lining out of that disaster, it is the fact that in community after community, people came out, worked together, and participated in cleanup efforts, supported each other. People from the northern part of the state, which was hit less severely, came down to the southern part of the state, helped out, strangers helped strangers. It was an extraordinary effort of people coming together. But the simple fact of the matter is that if a state like Vermont has communities that are devastated, a state like New Jersey has communities that are devastated, we cannot do it alone. The scale of this disaster is too overwhelming for a state of the size of Vermont. The federal government has long played an important role in disaster recovery. That's something we have known for many, many years, and we have seen time after time after time. When our fellow citizens in Louisiana and the Gulf Coast suffered the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, people in Vermont were there for them, and I can tell you How many people told me that we have got to do everything that we can to protect the people who were devastated by Katrina? When the citizens of Joplin, Missouri were hit by deadly tornadoes, people on the West Coast were there for them. And of course, when terrorists attacked the United States on 9/11, we were all there for New York City. That is what being a nation is about. The name of our country is the United States of America. United, U-N-I-T-E-D. And if that name means anything, it means that when disaster strikes one part of the countries, and when communities are devastated, and when people are hurt, and when bridges and roads are out, and when farmers can't produce the food, we as a nation rally together to support those communities. And that is what states impacted by Irene expect from Congress, because that is what being a nation is about. Disaster relief funded on an emergency basis is what Congress has done for decades, and it is what Congress must do now. The Senate did the right thing in quickly passing a $6.9 billion disaster relief supplemental appropriations bill, and I want to thank all of the people active in that, from Senator Reid to Senator Landrieu to Senator Leahy, all of the people who made that happen. They did a great job. Does that bill have everything that I would like to see in a disaster relief bill for the state of Vermont? No, it doesn't, quite frankly. But it is a very good bill. It is an urgently needed bill. It is an important step forward in the right direction. And I want to commend again all of those senators who played an active role in moving that bill along, including 10 Senate Republicans. Disaster aid should not be a partisan issue, but it seems the House Republicans are intent on making it one. The disaster funding that the House is likely to pass this week is totally inadequate and will not address the magnitude of the damages inflicted by Hurricane Irene or to the backlog in FEMA funding that existed before it. To my mind, it is an outrage that for the first time in modern American history, House Republicans want to have a budget debate over disaster assistance. They threaten to block urgently needed aid unless the cost of that help is offset by cuts in other needed programs. They want to use Hurricane Irene as another excuse for a budget fight. And think about the precedent that that sets. Now, what happens if tomorrow there is, God forbid, a disaster in New Mexico or a disaster in Colorado? Does that mean we should be cutting education or environmental protection in order to pay for help to New Mexico or Colorado or California? If there is a major earthquake someplace in this country and communities are devastated, do we cut back on the needs of the children? Do we cut back on Medicare and have that huge debate in order to pay for disaster relief? Historically, what the United States Congress has said, and what they said was right, that when disaster strikes, we as a nation come together and we provide the support to those communities who have been hurt to get them back on their feet. That is what we have done in this great country. And I am offended that some of my Republican colleagues in the House suddenly start thinking that we need a major budget debate for every disaster that is hitting this country. That is wrong. That is extraordinarily bad public policy. That is, frankly, unpatriotic and not what the United States is about. Yes, of course, we must continue to address our deficit problem, but not on the backs of communities in Vermont, New Jersey, North Carolina, or other states that have been devastated by Hurricane Irene. For those states and communities, we must get them emergency help, and we must get it to them as quickly as possible. Amazingly, I must say this, that this talk about budget offsets for disaster relief comes from some of the same people who repeatedly and conveniently ignore their own actions when it's them. Mr. President, Congress provided $800 billion to bail out Wall Street banks. I didn't hear any discussion about offsets when it came to bailing out Wall Street. Congress extended huge tax breaks and loopholes for the wealthiest people in this country, driving up the deficit. I didn't hear any call for offsets when we gave tax breaks to billionaires and large corporations. The United States is spending today $160 billion a year on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, including billions to rebuild those countries. I didn't hear any call for offsets when it came to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Mr. President, let me conclude by saying this. This country has its share of problems. We all know that. But if we forsake the essence of what we are as a nation, and that is we stand together when disaster strikes, if we forego that, if we no longer live up to that ideal, I worry very, very much about the future of our great nation. Thank you, Mr. President.